Hey folks, this is Tom Opre, your host to understanding everything related to wildlife and habitat conservation. I ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, I strive to have you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Sit back and enjoy another excellent discussion. Mike, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you guys do.
Right. I'm the managing director of a hunting and photographic safari company in Tanzania. I'm a second generation professional hunter.
I saw some of the photographs that you've been posting on some of the wildlife conservation user groups on Facebook. I'd love for you to kind of give me an idea historically, what was Tanzania like for wildlife when it comes to habitat?
Tanzania is one of the truly wild countries of Africa. There's no ranches and there's no game ranching. There's no fences as national parks. Roughly, I think about 80% of its land is set aside for wildlife and wildlife protection. It has a bunch of national parks, 22, I believe now. People don't understand the kind of sizes that we're dealing with the national parks and the country itself. All the boundaries are very hard to police. Tanzania has a rapidly growing population, top 10 in the world currently. The battle now is it's not so much where do animals go, but what areas do animals have, but where do the people, where's the boundary between the two, and how do we sort that out? And being able to police those boundaries is a big issue for the government, especially. Can
you give us some size perspective of maybe not only the total area that is in concession that's available for hunting, but also maybe some idea what some of the sizes that maybe your area is, just so we could have some idea?
My areas, I currently work in 3 contiguous concessions, and that is just under 2 million acres. Okay. So 3 concessions. So you're looking at 1.5 to 1.5 million acres per concession in Tanzania, and there's currently 114 concessions.
And so we're talking about a lot. I mean, a huge block of land. I mean, it's not a small country.
My concessions, to give you a size reference, the size of Houston, of Greater Houston, or if you're from overseas, it's the size of Greater London and surrounding areas.
And wildlife-wise, I mean, you guys, you have a large selection of different species. Of course, you have the big 5 in Africa, but you also have a lot of. Give us some idea what this habitat actually holds and takes care of.
Well, Tanzania is unique, whereas we have the north of Tanzania is known as Maasai land, the Maasai steppe, which has very unique species to that, the Gerenuk, Lesser Kudu, Grant's gazelle, Thompson's gazelle, there's Koch's hartebeest, fringed oryx, which is specific to the Tanzania, the north of Tanzania. Almost throughout the middle of Tanzania, there's a terrain of vegetation change to Miombo forest, and there you find species like sable and roan, of course buffalo and waterbuck and other species. And then, of course, in the west, specifically in Selous, you've got the Nyasa land wildebeest, which is also kind of specific to northern Mozambique and the Selous only. So, and there's also, if I go into little species like Kirk's dik-dik, there's a Harvey's red duiker, there's Livingston Sunni.
So you guys have it's an immense number of animals that are living on the landscape, not only just numbers of animals, but numbers of different species. So the biodiversity of this habitat is incredible.
Yes. And of course, each species requires a different kind of level of habitat. Some are very delicate on what they can actually feed on and where they can feed. You wouldn't think of something like a sable antelope as being very threatened by encroachment. They're kind of a common animal really in the Miombo forest. But, if you have herd species, a lot of herd species, which would include cow or cattle as a herd coming through, they actually really quite disturb the land and the foliage to an extent that the sable's really not happy with kind of thing.
Well, I would assume that domestic species you're talking about here in this cattle, these aren't wild cattle or anything. So what you're talking about is just that competition cattle for the same resource, I would assume. You guys have been there on the ground in the country for 3 generations now, and you've seen a lot of changes in the last couple decades, I would assume. kind of explain to folks what's going on the ground? You have all this wildlife originally, you've got all this habitat. We have huge areas. I mean, we're talking about areas that are the size of maybe multiple states in the United States. What's happened over the last 2 decades?
The same thing's happened all over the world. Is technology basically. You've got indigenous tribes that now are farming where they used to farm by hand or with cattle, are using tractors now, and they can afford tractors. And Maasai land is very fertile land. The devastation to habitat is very evident with the farming that's going on. And the thing is that they're not very good farmers. That their yield per acre is very poor. If I move out to the west towards my areas, what I've seen in the last 10 years or so, the expanse of people, is that a little farm will pop up in the middle of nowhere. And this guy will have an acre, he'll clear an acre by hand. And he doesn't have a tractor, he doesn't have machinery. So he clears by hand, he fells the trees. And once a tree's dry, he'll burn a tree. There's photos you'll see of burning land.
Now, is that for charcoal production, or is it just strictly
just to get rid of the tree, really? Mm-hmm. It's not really a hard wood. It's not a hard enough wood for charcoal production. So once he's got until that tree can burn, he'll sort of farm in between where that tree has fallen. So once he can burn the tree, now he's got a full acre to be able to farm. And he'll do that for a year. But now the following year, he doesn't have all the hardship of having to clear any land. So all he has to do is actually plow it, even by hand. And it may take him a couple of weeks to turn the land with a hoe and plant it. So now he's got some extra time. So he clears another piece of land and so on and so forth. So 3 years later, he suddenly has 3 or 4 acres, which is actually too much to sustain him and his family. So now he becomes, from subsistence, he turns into a commercial farmer. And nowadays, when I drive out west, it's a 2-day drive out there. So I'm spending 10 hours a day on the road. I'm seeing, as I drive in way out in the middle of the bush, I'm seeing all these bags of corn on the side of the road where these farmers are selling their excess. And it continues to grow as his farm grows, until now, when he's sold enough corn, he can afford a tractor. And that tractor that he buys, he'll also lease to other people, and so their farms grow. And again, it's not great farming out there. So their yields per acre, the land's not very fertile for a start, and their farming methods aren't very good. What a commercial farmer would need per acre, they need 2 acres.
And this ground we're talking about, this farm ground, was wildlife habitat. It did have these animals on it that we spoke about earlier in yes. many cases. Rainfall has become an issue in Southern Africa. How is rainfall affecting Tanzania? As far as, are they having enough rain? Down in where I'm at in Zambia, it's no longer consistently happening the end of October in the rainy season or early November. It's now happening later in the year and ending earlier. So it's a shorter period of time. What's the situation like with rain with you guys?
The last 2 years, actually, we did have quite a lot of rain. This year, the rains are very light, very, very late. The rains normally would expect them around the 15th, middle of November. Now we're at the 24th of November, and there hasn't been any rain, but the clouds are building. With the Miombo, and I speak about Miombo because that's kind of where I am, having the rain and not having proper drainage of these farms also washes away a lot of topsoil, which is also bad and bad for the crop. But also when you have these cleared farms, to rehabilitate that, it will take 3 or 4 times as long, or it may be even impossible, because if you don't have the foliage from the trees that have fallen on the ground to protect the land, it's very heat sensitive, and the trees are very heat sensitive growing. So you've changed the soil temperature. And so a Miombo tree, to grow back, you can't just leave it and think everything's going to come back as it was. It's going to come back very differently.
We have a great, beautiful land. We have people moving into this land. And so we're talking about they're moving into these areas that have been set aside by the government for wildlife, which would be these concessions that you're talking about, yours and others. But there's also an issue where there are many concessions that aren't being utilized at all, as I understand it, that there's a large percentage of the concessions in your country that don't have a safari operator utilizing them. Explain to me kind of what's happened with that and why that happened.
In Tanzania, we have
And I'll
three
just
types.
stop you. And just so people understand, when people are on the ground utilizing it in the safari business, I mean, you guys are out there watching for not only the poaching of wildlife, but also the destruction of the habitat. You're protecting these forests and this habitat that's out there for wildlife from illegal logging and from other uses, encroachment of human villages and whatnot. I would assume you guys you're kind of like the environmental cops out there at the same time, aren't you?
Absolutely, yes. The illegal stuff that goes on, creates more damage than even if you would allow it. If you allowed to control, for example, tree felling or logging, because they're indiscriminate. And a major problem in the west of Tanzania is honey hunting, which you wouldn't think is a big problem. But of course, when they do it illegally, what they do is search out a hollow tree that has a hive in it and cut down the whole tree in order to harvest that little bit of honey. And they're not doing it sustainably because they'll take all the honey and they won't leave, killing the queen and actually probably killing the whole hive. Whereas if they could do it properly, I've learned recently that, you can harvest half the honey, keep it, and then go back and harvest, and that the other half later once they've rejuvenated.
I think they call that conservation.
That's called conservation. Yes, exactly. Conservation of bees. But of course, so we stop that. Any destruction in the area is detrimental to the wildlife, and we need wildlife to make a living. Conservation and looking after the wildlife is paramount in everything we do. If the better the area that I have, the better it's looked after, the easier I can sell a safari. It's really heartbreaking to see that there's countries and people who don't know what actually happens on the ground and wants to stop what we do. But they don't realize the effect of when we move out of that area. There's no reason to protect that area, even for the government. The government obviously wants to protect an area because of the habitat, because of the wildlife, because of conservation, but they also make money from that area. So it's utilized and it has a value. When we leave, there's no value for that land apart from farming or grazing or logging or mining or putting a village there. That's the other option. And we're not dealing with national parks. Those are always going to be protected because they have a value for photographic tourists. We're dealing with areas that are marginal, which are good enough for a hunter, but not good enough for a photographic client. There's not enough game. A hunter, he's happy to climb up a hill and sit for hours to wait to see something and stalk it. A photographic client generally need to see an animal every 20 minutes, every 10 minutes. They need to be on something and they want to see the big five in one day and all that sort of stuff. They only they come on safari for 5-7 days, 10 days maybe, whereas a hunter's coming out for a whole month. So
what you're saying there is that in your areas, which, are the hunting concession areas, there are factors that are causing these areas not to be utilized, as I understand it. So what are the factors? You kind of alluded to that just a minute ago. Why are these incredible, beautiful lands with lots of wildlife on them, initially, they're now having human encroachment on them with farming and grazing, illegal grazing, but because there's nobody on the land anymore. Why?
The trophy bands, a lot of Europe, there's a lot of areas that have laid to waste, especially because they've stopped elephant hunting.
The folks that come out to hunt, they like to bring home a trophy or, the skins and the hides and the skulls. What you're saying is they can't do that in Tanzania.
They can't do that. We can't export to there's a few countries, America being one of them, that you won't allow the importation of the trophy hunted ivory, because somebody who's not a hunter is not going to understand why somebody wants to keep the memento of his hunt.
So your clients can't, because of different laws that are, trophy bans that are being enacted in potentially the United Kingdom, the United States, and other different countries in the Western world, which have large populations of hunters that like to hunt internationally. And these folks are bringing money into your communities by hiring people like you to go on these hunts, or even as you guys do, you even do some photo safaris, and some of the other operators I know in Tanzania have some extensive photo safari businesses. But the reality on the ground is that some of your clients can't, because they can't export, they just don't come.
Exactly. Yes. And they'd rather go somewhere else, or even just stay at home in America. You're not going to stop people hunting by stopping them importing their trophies. We're seeing a huge decline in the number of hunters that want to come to Tanzania. Specifically, elephant hunting is all but gone, especially for the Americans. But what's happening is you get some other countries that are allowed to import the elephant that are coming. The problem is with that they know that there's no competition and they want to do it for even cheaper, which we're not able to do. It's not sustainable. When Cecil was shot and they stopped hunting, they stopped the importation for several years into America. Essentially, very few lion hunts were sold. And that caused many operators to go out of business because they didn't have the income to sustain the area and sustain communities and anti-poaching. So they handed back areas and really haven't been able to get off the ground to go back into those areas anymore. And those are the areas that have lost so much habitat. Because you want to harvest a lion or an elephant or a buffalo or a leopard, you're looking after the habitat that's looking after animals as small as dragonflies and damselflies and dung beetles and all sorts of insects and everything else that you're looking after, as well as the honeybees, because I think it's documented that without honeybees, humanity ceases to exist.
Yeah, no, the great pollinators of our planet.
Yeah.
You've shown me some photos, and I'll show some of these to the folks on while you're watching this. I mean, it's it's unbelievable what you see here. And I've seen it myself personally in Zim. I was in the Save Valley a couple of years ago. And as soon as we took a charter flight out, and as soon as we got past that demarcation of the boundary of the conservancy and then the communal lands, I mean, I didn't see, you couldn't put two sticks together enough for an antelope to live in, let alone the big five, all the way to Harare, the capital, right, which was a 2-hour flight. And what I'm seeing in some of the photos that you've taken, aerial photos here, it's the same kind of harsh starkness of, this beautiful wildlife habitat. And then there's just a straight line there. And then there's nothing there, because it's all been slashed and burned. And I would assume these grounds also get overgrazed. Is that correct?
The people that are doing this, obviously they want their cattle and their farm. So that now they're overgrazing what they have because they've even got less land because they've got a farm and 2-3 acres of farm, and they want 500 head of cattle as well. And that head of cattle is not contained to a ranch. It's free to go wherever it wants, and so they constantly moving and just moving backwards and forwards to even to water. All that land between wherever they're grazing and the water is completely destroyed, which is a huge problem.
The broader public here in the Western world, as they watch and listen to this conversation, are going to ask this question, though: why can't these people have a farm? Why can't these people have 500 head of cows? Why can't they have these opportunities?
Well, they can, but the problem is managing it. Somebody can have 500 head of cattle if he has 500 acres to look after them on. But we haven't got to the stage. You're talking about a third world country where the education hasn't reached some of these rural areas on how to manage your cattle, how to manage your farm, how to farm better. New York Central Park, people are told, okay, don't go on the grass there, because it's not good for the grass, go around it. And they go around it because, you're taught to obey that, and you understand why you shouldn't walk on grass. Mm-hmm. Now, you tell an African in a local village way out that's never seen electricity, no, you can't go in there. Don't leave that. That's for wildlife. And he thinks, are you nuts? I've got to survive here. I'm going to go in there because out here is full, and I still want my 500 head of cattle. An animal means very little to him. It's the word for an animal in Swahili is nyama. That's all it is. And when they look at an elephant, it's not a thing of beauty. It's not, when they look at a lion, it's not a wonderful lion and how beautiful is that, and look at it beautifully walking across the Serengeti. It's just nyama. It's just a thing. they're still in survival mode and living day to day.
What the real problem are the areas that don't have safari operators, and those are the ones that are depicted in the pictures you've sent me in the video, correct?
I do have villages within my area, but we're able to control how they expand as well. Because they are going to be expands, the population's increasing. But instead of one guy having a farm here and then the next guy going 5 kilometers away and opening his other farm, and then everything between him and his neighbor is void of game because of the movement between him and his farm and his other farm and whatnot, we can say, no, don't farm over here, just butt up to the other guy, and at least you're containing it. And I have even a video of the same time scale or that Google Earth thing that shows how the village is growing, but it's just growing in its own little nucleus, if you like. It's not just spreading all over the place. And again, because we're trying to tell them, leave some wildlife, leave the habitat.
So what really, Mike, is the solution to, at the end of the day, what do we want to see occur? Do we want to see more wildlife on the landscape? Do we want to see more habitat? Because without the habitat, we don't have the wildlife. What is the solution in Tanzania?
Yeah, the way they think, the Western world thinks, is very different from the local African on the ground, the villager. He's looking at African wildlife and habitat in a very different way. He needs to benefit from it in some way, and that's what hunting does. You can't just have land vacant. It will be used for something. The African government will use it for something. They need to. Of course, the African governments, third world, don't have money to look after that, just a big chunk of land without having income from it to look after it. We're still, most African countries are struggling to put schools and hospitals for and infrastructure. So that's their priority. Looking after land is not their priority, and their way of conserving it to say, okay, who's going to look after this for us? And so so it can look after itself, basically. So when a hunter's in there, they're getting $500,000 off that piece of land into their conservation. 80% of it goes back into that area.
The real problem, though, is I've seen this all over the world, is people, humans, because we're all over the place, and it's of course the population of Tanzania. I'm familiar with Ethiopia at over 100 million people. I'm not sure what Tanzania's population is, but I would assume it is growing exponentially, correct?
It's 60 million right now, yeah.
And so what you're seeing is it's not only growing in the cities, but it's also growing in these rural areas. And so you're seeing these people, proliferate through into these areas where this habitat obviously has a value because it has, honey in it, it has wild game on it, it has grass that can be grazed, trees that can be cut and harvested. So, these areas, but they're not being conserved by these people because there's no real conservation ethos in their mindset, because you're utilizing the resource, you're protecting it, and thus you guys want to make sure it's conserved properly. So hats off to you guys. And Mike, I appreciate your time here today, and it's great to hear a viewpoint about what's going on in Tanzania, right on the ground with somebody who's dealing with it every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I enjoyed that. Thanks a lot.
Folks, if you want to find out more information about wildlife and habitat conservation, go to the Shepherds of Wildlife website at shepherdsofwildlife.org. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Until next time, ask yourself, are you truly a wildlife conservationist?